2 winters ago, my wife Sarah and I decided to do all our Christmas shopping at one of the biggest malls in the state. It was the kind of place that had everything: boutiques, department stores, specialty shops, and we figured we could knock out all our gift buying in one trip. We had a long list, and by the time we arrived, the parking lot was already packed. It was one of those cold December days where your breath fogged up the moment you stepped outside. The first few hours passed quickly. We went store to store, finding gifts for friends, family, and each other. We eventually unloaded a heap of bags into the car parked in the garage before heading back inside to finish the last stretch. By this time, the sun had set, and the mall had a distinctly different vibe. The festive decorations, string lights, wreaths, a massive Christmas tree in the center court, seemed a little less cheerful under the dim lighting. People were tired, the crowds were thinner, and the once lively atmosphere felt quieter, almost eerie. As we neared the end of our shopping, Sarah and I decided to split up temporarily to buy gifts for each other without spoiling the surprise. "Meet me at the food court in 30 minutes, she said with a smile before heading off toward the escalators. I wandered through a couple of stores, finding something I knew she'd love. I kept an eye on my watch, eager to meet back up and grab something to eat before we called it a night. That's when it happened. I was walking through the mall's quieter section, where some of the smaller specialty shops were located, when I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I turned to see a woman standing behind me. She was in her late 30s, bundled up in a heavy coat and scarf. Her eyes darted nervously around as she leaned in slightly. "Your wife's looking for you," she said, her voice low and hurried. "She said her phone died and she's waiting for you outside by the north exit." The north exit? That didn't make sense. Sarah would have no reason to be outside, especially not at that exit. It was the least used area of the mall, with no parking lot nearby, just a small patch of grass and a dimly lit path leading to an adjacent building. Something about the woman's tone and demeanor put me on edge. Before I could respond, she smiled faintly and walked off, disappearing into the thinning crowd. I stood there for a moment trying to piece things together. Why would Sarah send a stranger to find me? Why would she go to the north exit instead of the food court? I pulled out my phone and called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Despite my growing unease, I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she needed fresh air. Maybe she couldn't hear her phone in the noisy mall. Against my better judgment, I headed toward the north exit. The walk felt longer than it should have, and with each step, my apprehension grew. The holiday decorations thinned out in this section, and the cheerful music playing throughout the mall was barely audible now. When I reached the doors, I paused, staring out into the dark. The area outside was exactly how I remembered. Quiet, desolate, and poorly lit. A single dim street lamp stood off to the side, its light casting long, wavering shadows on the patch of snow-covered grass. Beyond that was a restaurant that had already closed for the night. "No, Sarah." I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my face. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing faintly. There was no response, just the muffled hum of the mall behind me. I looked around, but the space was empty. I felt a deep chill, not from the cold, but from the sense that something was very wrong. Just as I was about to turn back inside, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Relief washed over me as I saw Sarah's name on the screen. I answered quickly. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice tight with concern. "I'm at the food court," she replied, confused. "I've been waiting for you. Where are you?" My blood ran cold. I glanced back at the mall doors, then at the dark, empty space around me. "I'll be right there," I said, rushing back inside. As I walked briskly toward the food court, I told her about the woman and what she had said. Sarah's voice grew sharp. "I didn't send anyone to find you. Who was she?" We met at the food court minutes later, both of us shaken. Sarah hadn't left the mall at all and had no idea who the woman could have been. She hadn't told anyone her phone was dead. It wasn't even dead to begin with. We decided to head home, cutting our shopping trip short. As we walked toward the parking garage, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see the woman again. But the mall seemed quieter than ever, as if the life had been drained from it. When we reached the car, we quickly loaded up our bags and drove off, relieved to leave the unsettling experience behind. But even now, I can't stop thinking about it. Was the woman trying to lead me into a trap? Was someone waiting for me outside that exit? And how did she know enough about Sarah and me to make the story believable? We'll never know what her intentions were, but I'm grateful Sarah called me when she did. Otherwise, this story might have had a very different ending. A few Christmases ago, I found myself doing some last-minute shopping for my nephew, Ryan. He was 7 years old and obsessed with action figures, so I figured a trip to a nearby toy store would be the perfect way to find him something special. The store was part of a small strip mall that I usually avoided. It wasn't in the best area, but it was one of the only places that still had what I was looking for. The snow had picked up as I parked my car, blanketing the sidewalks and muffling the noise from the nearby road. I pulled my coat tighter as I walked into the store, greeted by the warmth and bright fluorescent lights. The place was surprisingly busy for a small shop, with parents and grandparents bustling through the aisles, grabbing whatever was left on the shelves. The first few minutes were uneventful. I wandered through the action figure section, scanning for something Ryan would love. After a bit of searching, I found it, a limited edition superhero set that I knew would make me his favorite uncle. As I reached for the box, I heard a voice behind me. "Great choice," the man said. I turned and saw a man standing a few feet away. He was in his mid-40s, dressed in a shabby coat with a scarf that looked like it had seen better days. His face was pale, and his eyes had a strange intensity that made me uncomfortable. He gave me a small smile, but it didn't feel friendly. "Thanks," I said cautiously, grabbing the toy and stepping away. I expected him to move on, but he didn't. Instead, he followed me down the aisle, his footsteps unnervingly close behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and he met my eyes with that same unsettling smile. "You shopping for someone special?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, my nephew." The man nodded, his gaze drifting to the toy in my hands. "Lucky kid," he muttered almost to himself. His tone was strange, too casual, yet somehow loaded with meaning. I forced a polite smile and walked toward the register, hoping he'd leave me alone. But when I got in line, he positioned himself at the end of the aisle, watching me. By the time I paid and left the store, I was more annoyed than anything. People could be weird, especially during the holidays, and I figured he was just one of those overly friendly strangers who didn't know how to read social cues. I tossed the toy into the passenger seat of my car and started the engine. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw him again. He was standing near the entrance, staring directly at my car. The pale glow of the streetlights made his face look even more ghostly, and the way he stood, completely still, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, sent a chill through me. I drove off quickly, telling myself it was just a coincidence. The drive home should have been relaxing. The roads were quiet, and the snow falling outside made the world feel peaceful. But that peace was shattered when I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights trailing me. They weren't right behind me, but they kept their distance, following my every turn. I told myself it wasn't the same man. Couldn't be. But as I turned onto a quieter street near my neighborhood, the car followed, matching my every move. My heart pounded as I tried to think of what to do. Should I head straight home? Should I call the police? I decided to take a detour, circling through a few streets to see if the car would stay with me. It did. By now, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The car behind me stayed just far enough back to avoid suspicion, but it was clear they were following me. I took a sharp turn onto an unfamiliar road, hoping to lose them. For a moment, it seemed to work. The headlights disappeared. I exhaled in relief, thinking I was finally in the clear. But as I approached a stop sign, the car appeared again, this time speeding up and pulling alongside me. I glanced over and felt my stomach drop. It was him, the man from the store. He was in the driver's seat, staring at me with that same unnerving smile. His car slowed as mine did, as if daring me to react. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted. I slammed on the gas, my car skidding slightly on the icy road as I sped away. My heart raced as I weaved through the streets, praying he wouldn't follow. When I finally reached a main road, I spotted a gas station up ahead and pulled in. The parking lot was well lit and busy, with several cars and people around. I parked near the entrance and bolted inside. From the window, I watched as the man's car slowly passed by. He didn't pull into the lot or stop. He just kept driving, his headlights fading into the snowy darkness. I stayed at the gas station for a while, trying to calm down before heading home. I checked the rearview mirror obsessively the whole drive back, but I didn't see him again. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the relief was overwhelming. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew where I lived, or worse, that he'd find me again. I never saw the man after that night, but the memory of his smile still haunts me. What did he want? Why did he follow me? I'll never know, but one thing's for sure. I'll never look at toy shopping the same way again. A few winters ago, I decided to tackle my Christmas shopping on a chilly Friday night. It wasn't my favorite activity, but I had a long list of gifts to buy, including something special for my partner, Ben. The snow had started falling lightly as I left work, and I figured I'd make the most of the evening by visiting several stores in one trip. My first stop was a large shopping plaza on the edge of town. The strip mall had a variety of stores, and I spent about an hour wandering through aisles, picking out gifts for family and friends. By the time I left the first store, the parking lot had grown darker, illuminated only by scattered streetlights. I found my car parked near the middle of the lot, unlocked it, and climbed inside. That's when I noticed him. A man sat in a car parked in the next row over, staring in my direction. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his car's roof, but his posture was tense, as if he was leaning forward. I shook off the discomfort, telling myself he was probably just people watching while waiting for someone. I started my car and drove off, determined not to overthink it. My next stop was a Target a couple of miles away. It was busier than the strip mall, with families and last-minute shoppers rushing in and out of the store. I spent another 30 minutes browsing, picking up a mix of gifts and a few practical items for myself. By the time I was ready to leave, the snow had picked up, and the parking lot was a mess of slush and half-cleared walkways. As I approached my car, a wave of unease washed over me. Parked a short distance away was a vehicle that looked eerily familiar. My eyes scanned the interior and my stomach dropped. It was the same man. He was sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me just as he had before. This time I couldn't ignore it. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. Had he followed me? Was it just a coincidence? Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I quickly loaded my bags into the car, locked the doors, and drove off. To calm myself, I rationalized that maybe it was all in my head. The city wasn't huge, and it wasn't impossible for two people to end up at the same stores on a busy shopping night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, lingering even as I left the parking lot. I had one more stop to make, a small grocery store near my apartment. It was a quick errand, just a few items I needed for dinner, and I told myself there was no way the man would show up again. The store was quieter than the others, almost empty, and I was in and out within 15 minutes. But as I approached my car, my heart sank. Across the lot, partially obscured by another vehicle, was the same man. His car was parked at an angle, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. I froze for a moment, my breath clouding in the icy air. He wasn't just coincidentally here, he was following me. This time, I didn't hesitate. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and backed out of the spot as quickly as I could. My eyes flicked to my rearview mirror as I drove, but he didn't follow me. His car remained parked as I pulled onto the main road and headed home. By the time I reached my driveway, I had almost convinced myself that I was safe. I parked, unloaded my groceries, and stepped into the warm comfort of my home. Ben greeted me with a smile, and I told him briefly about the strange man at the stores. He listened but reassured me it was probably nothing. But then I glanced out the living room window. Parked on the street, just a few houses down, was the same car. The man was sitting inside, motionless, his car idling in the snow. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized he had followed me all the way home. I turned to Ben, panic clear in my voice. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing a baseball bat from the closet, he stormed out the front door, heading straight for the man's car. The moment Ben reached the yard, the car's engine roared, and the man sped off, tires screeching as he disappeared into the night. Ben returned to the house, his face stern. "If he comes back, we're calling the police," he said. But the man never returned. For weeks, I found myself looking over my shoulder, scanning every parking lot and street for that car. Thankfully, I never saw him again. To this day, I can't shake the thought of what he might have done if I'd lived alone, or if Ben hadn't been there to scare him off. Whatever his intentions were, I'm just grateful the story ended when it did.